Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the National Creativity Event, Creativity and Wellbeing. And today we're starting off with a session from some colleagues from Edinburgh CLN and the Southeast Improvement Collaborative, where they're going to be talking us through a learner-led consultation on Granton Waterfront that they've been involved in, and the learning strategy, where they were asking learners why, where, and how they like to learn. And just before we get into that, just say this morning this session is being recorded, so please do keep cameras off. Just to mention that things are being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, please do switch your camera off. And we're joined this morning by Linda Lees, who's Wider Achievement Manager at Edinburgh City Council, and Charlotte Bennett, who is Education Support Officer for the South East Improvement Collaborative. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to them for hosting today's session. And I'm going to hand over to Charlotte, I think. Thanks.
Lovely to be here this morning, and nice to see some of you, although I know cameras are off. It's great to see some of you here. I'm just going to share my screen. So Linda, could you just let me know if you can see everything, please?
Yep, that's come up now, Charlotte. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for that introduction, Jonathan. So the session, or just a little welcome, just accessibility, turn on live captions and choose language if you need to use them, and just having your camera off and mics off just kind of helps with bandwidth and things. But I think we've got a small group of people with us today, so feel free to kind of chip in away if you've got questions throughout. That would be great. And if you do need a notepad or anything to record your thoughts, that might be useful. So we are going to be doing a session today on our learner-led consultation that we've been involved in, which is a creative approach to engaging young people in curriculum reform. So just a little bit about the two of us. My name's Charlotte Bennett, and I'm the Education Support Officer for the SEIC, the South East Improvement Collaborative, and my remit is with creative learning. And I'm hosted by Edinburgh City Council for the SEIC within the Arts and Creative Learning team with Linda. So Linda, do you want to just do the introduction?
Hi, yes, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all, although I can't see you all. I'm going to put my camera off shortly to preserve my broadband, which is never the greatest. But my name is Linda Lees, and I have been working with arts and creative learning for very many years, and I was the manager of the arts and creative learning team. I've now got a much larger remit, which is really exciting because it gives me the opportunity to connect creative learning with other things like outdoor learning and youth work and adult education and all sorts of things. But my passion has always been the power of creativity in education, and will remain so with my Wider Achievement Manager hat on. As part of what we've been doing in Edinburgh, one of the things that we really tried very hard to do was be as strategic as we could with our creative learning, and that's why Charlotte is our Education Support Officer for creativity with the SEIC, and that has really made a huge difference in our work with our South East Improvement Collaborative colleagues. It's been amazing, and that is sitting alongside all the good work that our other colleague, who's not with us today, she is in Oulu talking about creativity to people in Finland, but she leads a lot of this work for Edinburgh. So Charlotte and Lorna work really closely together. But what we're about to talk about in terms of a learner-led consultation and a creative approach has been a great piece of work with Charlotte, Lorna, and some of the QIOs and Edinburgh Learns for Life, which is our learning strategy in Edinburgh, the development officers there, along with colleagues in lifelong learning and partners. So it's been a really collaborative approach with creativity very much at the heart of the learner-led consultation. So that's a little bit about me and just a little bit more about what we're about to talk to you about, and hopefully you'll talk with us as well about, because we have built in some time for a little bit of discussion. So Charlotte, can you go on the next slide? It's not moved on.
It's moved on for me.
Has it
works.
moved on for anybody else? Not for me. what about others? Could somebody just jump in and say if it's moved on for them or not?
Yeah, it's
That's
moved
it,
on.
it's moved on now.
Yeah.
Okay. Charlotte, it moved on briefly and then sort of popped back.
I mean, I can see the second slide, the site context. Can you see that one?
We've got that now. At least I have.
Lovely,
Somebody's
fantastic.
popped a hand up. Does somebody? I can see a wee hand there.
Sorry,
is
that was
just to talk.
tell you I could see the slides.
Super. Thank you. And I see a hand from Lisa. Are you wanting to jump in with something?
No, sorry, that was to tell you I had the slides. Sorry.
That's the legacy hand. Okay, no worries. Oh, the joys of Teams, eh? We'll all be back in person one day soon. Okay, well, just bear with us. We might have some hiccups around the slides, but we'll get there. So what we wanted to do first was just talk a little bit about the context in which this learner-led consultation was taking place. So in Granton, for those of you that know Edinburgh, Granton is an area where there is quite a lot of deprivation and has been historically. It's an area for regeneration. It's down on the waterfront. There's huge potential and always has been, but there are definitely lots of challenges within the area. The whole area is being regenerated and it's a very major project in Edinburgh. It's about bringing in new and mixed housing. It's about having mixed different, I suppose, partners really together in the area. Just how holistic regeneration is. Also, about our in essence, I suppose what we're looking at is that communities and people and schools within their 20 minutes of their neighbourhood should have access to all the services that they need and all the opportunities that we need. And with my wider achievement hat on, I often think about how much, children growing up in poverty and in areas of high multiple deprivation, there's not a poverty of aspiration, but there is a poverty of opportunity. And one of the really exciting things about the vision and the concept behind the Granton waterfront development is it's trying to build all those opportunities that are often lacking in some areas into the community. And it's trying to bring all the partners together. So we've got this big site. There's lots of master plans that have had different owners over the last 20 years. There is an area of contaminated land. And then there's been market failure, private and sector investment has halted. So, that starts to give you a sense that this is a community that's, had a lot of hope and expectation, and maybe it's not always been realised, but things are really happening now. So that idea that there's been piecemeal development and a poor sense of place, what we're really keen when we look at Granton and the whole development is that we don't create a community that gentrifies the community and either drives up house prices so that locals are, I suppose, more marginalised. We want to create a real community, a mixed community where all the opportunities for everybody are on the doorstep and that people know about them and are able to access them. And obviously schools sit at the heart of their community, so that's really important to us. So you can see there the neighbourhoods are within the top 5% areas of deprivation and lots of former industry, but the neglected history and heritage needs to be brought to the fore. And then just going back at that last point in the bottom right hand corner, the strong public sector partnership and vision, I would say that genuinely now is strong and there's a real energy behind this. Next slide, Charlotte. I think I might have to tell you the next slide about a minute before I need it.
I was trying to plan it so that it would be there.
Not to worry, that seemed to move reasonably quickly, so that's great. I would say as well, if anybody does want to pose any questions in the chat, please go ahead and do so, because we've built in some time for discussion. So if you've got questions, pop them in the chat and we can pick them up because we want to have a bit of a discussion with you as well. Context a little bit more. So here we are with 1 in 4 of the residents of North Edinburgh living in the 10% most deprived data zones in Scotland. So you know what that means. The crime rates are pretty high. And, we are seeing all sorts of issues around that. So that's something else that we're needing to consider. Lowest income in Edinburgh, very poor health outcomes. So these things are the reason we're setting this as context is part of that holistic view that we're trying to take to improve education outcomes, health outcomes, and to create a real sense of community with the schools at the heart of that. The residents in the fourth area, I'm kind of jumping around these because you can read them at your own pace, but the residents in the fourth area of Edinburgh report some of the lowest positive views of learning as a place or about having influence on local issues. Now that's a big issue. If that's the way people feel about where they live, that's one of the reasons that we wanted to really focus our creativity on the area and focus on having a learner-led consultation that took a really creative approach, because you've got to change that negative sentiment about where you live, because that really does affect all sorts of things, and mental health and all sorts of things. So the relative poverty is 27% and 33%. This is slightly out of date, but 33% of school leavers in Craig-Royston attained literacy and numeracy levels. Sorry, I'm just looking at that. So that was 2018-19. So you can see that that is quite out of date. And I don't want you to go away with a negative impression of Craig-Royston, because the head teacher and school community and the whole cluster, as we call them, the learning community, are doing tremendous amounts of work. So please don't go away with a negative impression. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm not seeing a next slide yet. Has anybody else seen one? Oh, here we go. Right, there's masses and masses on this, and it's far too tiny to read. But basically, this is just an overview of proposed new uses. So one of the things that I'm sure will be of interest as well is that we've also got museums and galleries with their stores in that area. So there's a really great opportunity for learning around the heritage and the opportunities for thinking about using arts and culture and heritage in a different way. But there's lots of proposed new uses in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare, education. So I'll not linger on this slide. If you can just move on to the next one, Charlotte. Okay. So we're now looking at the learning providers that we've got in the area, and these are very much what you would traditionally think of as your learning providers. You've got your primary schools and your secondary schools and your special schools, our libraries, the early year centres, community centres, and Edinburgh College. What we were really looking to do with Granton, if you can just pop back a slide. I know you're keen there, Charlotte, thank you. I suppose just before we kind of do move on, because we're going to open this up for discussion before we move on to some of the other bits about the learner-led consultation itself. But I'll talk just briefly about the learner-led consultation and why we were wanting to do that and who we did it with. So we wanted to think about, as I think Jonathan introduced, why learning is important, where learning takes place, and how young people and adults like to learn. And that starts to open up the questions that, how much learning takes place beyond the walls, the gates of these buildings, because these are buildings. How much is the community a resource for learning? How much are the assets in the community a resource for learning? And how do people understand or even know about the assets within their community, either those that are existing, like the fact that it sits there on a waterfront. There's amazing learning resources just by going down to the seashore. How much of that is recognised and understood? And then how much is the negative view that people, residents, have of their community a barrier to learning? So bringing together these learning providers and a range of other partners in the area, we developed two really important strategies. One is a cultural strategy for the area, and the other is a learning strategy for the area. And these are learning strategies for the community, and they link very closely into our vision for learning in Edinburgh, which is Edinburgh Learns for Life. And so we're using and we're putting a lot of effort and energy into the work around Granton so that we can actually learn from that, where other areas are looking at a place-based approach, they're looking at their learning communities, they're looking about the future of learning, curriculum design and curriculum reform, and thinking, well, if we're putting a lot of effort into Granton, how can some of the lessons learned there and some of the really great things that we're seeing and hearing be shared? And they may not have the same level of resource, but it doesn't mean that the principles can't be the same in terms of looking at that whole community. So Charlotte, if you can go on to the next slide, because what we've got next is a few questions. So we'd really like you to participate, because I'm sure you all know that if you're leading something and you can't see faces and you're not in a room and there's a deathly silence, it's not that easy. So we'd love you to have a wee think and either pop your hand up or put things in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and the hands because I know that Charlotte will be able to see that. But we'd like you to think and talk about just now, just for a few minutes, about how important it is to know your school community well, and think about how the local assets can contribute to curriculum design in a really creative way, and how might creative approaches help overcome any local challenges or barriers to learning. So I'm going to trust that you're all going to pop your hands up and have a bit of a discussion. There's not so many of us that we can't have a discussion. So does anybody want to kick us off? Okay, good. And you've left it long enough. Somebody will pop a hand up. Barbara.
Hi, Linda. Sorry, I'm a bit hoarse this morning. Forgive me. Yeah, I was about to type in the chat, but I'll just say it. I certainly found as a head teacher that it was really important to know the local businesses round about your school, because they are, creating partnerships with local businesses can really enhance your curriculum design. And, apart from the obvious DYW connection, they can come in and talk about and enhance and draw out and work on skills, employment skills. So apart from getting the odd bit of money from them, which was also great. But yeah, keeping in touch with your local businesses and really building up a sustainable partnership with them in terms of curriculum design is really, really important, I think.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is one thing I didn't mention was the kind of local businesses as well, which are part of the conversations. But yeah, that's a really important point, particularly around, as you say, positive and sustained destinations. But those pathways, rather than the pathways forward, is look back. So starting right in early years in primary schools, how your local business is able to, give great real life context for your school, as well as occasionally some money. Fee, you've got your hand up. Lovely to see you again. Hello. What would you like to contribute?
I'm just sitting reflecting on it. It's actually something that you and I did together a number of years ago that sat entirely within the community in the Granton and the Pilton and Granton community. And I think what's really important, looking at your questions, is to consider what your local assets are. Barbara makes a really, really good point about local businesses, but there are I don't want to use the word gatekeepers because that sounds negative, but there are people within the community that if it helps to identify them, then they open a great deal of pathways for collaboration and creativity and all that sort of thing. On a very, very grassroots level, to give the example to the group of, I worked with Edinburgh City Council to deliver something called All About You, which was about creativity for families, and the most successful one was in the Granton community, and it was largely because very early on in the day one of the local residents put it on our Facebook chat and everybody came. Granton emptied and came to the community centre. And I think making sure that we're considering people out with not just parents but people within local communities as assets to contribute to that creative thinking is really important. I'm waffling a wee bit, sorry.
Not at all. Yeah, it's lovely to be reminded of that project because it was fantastic and it was called All About You and Fee. I remember we had a bit of a giggle one day when somebody refer to the project as all about me. I thought that was great. But actually, yeah, you know, for people participating, it was all about them, and it was a great project. But that's really helpful. And I suppose it is that thing about assets and how people see your community. And, you know, schools, the teachers, the heads, the PSAs, everybody in a school, they know their children and young people well. But with the greater focus and emphasis that we're seeing, particularly with the new SAC and everything else, we're seeing a real imperative to understand the poverty that people are living in, the communities in which they're living in, the housing in which they're living in, and a recognition that schools cannot close that gap alone, and that has to be done in partnership. It has to be done in partnership with parents, with carers, with the physical assets, with the, you know, the other assets that are around the community. And that's a big job. But, you know, collectively, these are all our children. And as our new Executive Director, Amanda Hatton, talks about, a life, not a service. We're here to help change lives. Does anybody else have anything they would like to ask or contribute, or any reflections? Because, you know, genuinely, we are interested in what people think. Barbara?
Sorry, you'll be sick of seeing my face, but I've just, at the age I am and the amount of time I spent in schools, I've just got so much experience, both positive and negative. But one of the things I would say was that we just loved having creative partners in school, but very often it was that bit about they came in for a day, they did something wonderful and then went away again, and therefore there was no impact, if you like. The kids enjoyed it, the teachers enjoyed it, I enjoyed it. But it's got to go beyond that. So it's about building partnerships with creative partners, artists, etc., and maintaining that link. Because both, I think, for me, teachers and artists learn from each other. So working and learning together can actually have a huge impact on the practice that goes on in the school and on the curriculum, and definitely on the learners. And just to say that on that note, there are 6 projects going on nationally just now, 1 in each RIC, in which creative partners, and Linda and Charlotte know this, but for others in the room, creative partners have been matched with schools who applied for the funding, Creative Wellbeing Fund it is, and they have a year-long project they're working on. And earlier this week we had a session, I think it was Tuesday, just hearing how the projects were going, and just to kind of confirm my hopes and wishes is that already we're seeing early impact of, you know, positive outcomes on learner wellbeing coming through from this creative experience that's being offered and crafted and created in the schools. So yeah, creative partners, sustainable.
Absolutely, thank you. Amy, in you come.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, so I'm kind of based in the Angus Council. I'm the YMI lead coordinator there. And one of the challenges we've found is trying to connect with our local partners in that sense. And that we've found that actually, you know, there's this assumption that actually the Central Belt has the kind of highest quality. And we're really pushing to engage with local because there's that, like we're saying, around the sustainability, but there's also progression pathways. Whereas if we're engaging with, you know, partners who are not local to us, then, you know, it's a more challenging progression pathway, and our young people maybe don't value it in the same way because they're not seeing the connection to their local community. But having said that, obviously every local community has different, you know, different experiences, different creative partners, different businesses. So it's trying to tap into them. And I think sometimes there's, in the past, certainly there's been this wall between authority and external, and we're trying to kind of chip that away so that we can engage, and there's not this fear of bringing in someone and it being not the experience they're hoping for, but also working with those people to ensure that they do come in with a really creative and innovative, engaging project, or, you know, whatever they're going to come in with, and that they feel supported by us as a local authority. And so we're not, you know, setting them up to fail, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, there's so many ways of doing these sorts of things. I mean, sometimes, as you say, it could be a short term, somebody coming into school, and sometimes a short term someone coming into school can have quite a big impact, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes the long-term artist in residence creates dependency rather than sustainability. So these things are all very particular, and that's why partnerships and discussion and good understanding and really good relationships are actually fundamental to all of this, because, you know, when you see the things that some people are living with and dealing with and the impact that has on the rest of their lives, then, you know, we are in the privileged position, but also with the responsibility as working in the public sector to do everything that we can to work together collaboratively to ensure that we do what we can to support better outcomes, better education, better health, and just better lives for people in our communities. So that's very much what our approach in Granton is, and that we really hope that, you know, by bringing a lot of creativity to the approaches and by involving young people and actually young people, children and very young children in the early learning centres in the primary schools and also in the community, by involving them in a collaborative approach to learner-led consultation with artists and going out and looking at their communities. That way we will involve people, give them a bit of agency and let people think differently through the eyes of an artist about their community, about learning, about what, why, where, how you learn, and how that all doesn't have to be sitting in rows in a classroom, and how that, you know, we want to break down, I suppose, any professional snobbery and any boundaries and have real mutual respect across our different partners. So that's very much the ambition. Does anybody else want to ask or contribute or just reflect in any way? Because if not, we can move on, and if you have a later thought, you can always pop it in the chat. But any other hands? I can only see the hands at the moment, so I don't know if there's more chat coming. But if nobody else does want to, I think we'll move on. Okay. Charlotte, do you want to move on?
Can you see that, Linda? The next slide.
Nope, not yet. Can anyone else see the next slide? I can see it now. Hurrah! Great, thank you. So just a little bit more about the kind of development and the framework. So this is something around some of the deliverables that the Granton Regeneration is looking to do. So we're looking at lots of new housing, and when you look at that wee picture in the top left-hand corner, that's really quite attractive looking housing compared to what a lot of what's in the area. And, you know, there's been big gap sites for a long time when some of the older, poorer housing was taken down and new housing is being built. But there's affordable housing, there's mixed tenure, there's all sorts of things planned for the area, so that we can try and really create that sense of community, but not shift people who are resident there and have been resident there for generations out, and not price them out either. There's a three-stream primary school. There is, I mentioned earlier, the National Museums of Scotland have their centre there, so that is a really exciting learning resource. And the artworks, that's where the storage of all sorts of artworks are, and that's all down in that area. So we've got a really rich cultural centre in the area that's being looked at, and we're working together through the cultural strategy in the area. And we've got people on both the cultural strategy and the learning strategy for the community, which is really great. So we can make sure that all these, you know, things, assets in the area become part of what schools see, know and understand as the amazing different opportunities to learn. We're also looking very much at active travel and outdoor learning. Our outdoor learning team are doing a lot of leading on that, which is absolutely great, and a lot of creative approaches and thinking about active travel. We've got an aspiration to really create a first-class public realm, because those environments are important about how you feel about how you live and where you live, and, you know, ensuring again that those changes are seen as positive, as not the gentrification of the area, but actually something that everybody is entitled to, and no matter who you are, this is your public realm. And Edinburgh College, again, that being right on the doorstep, so that we're not, you know, educating young people to leave the area necessarily. often, and you'll know this, whether it's rural areas, whether it's areas of high deprivation, you'll know that very often the young people leave because the opportunities are elsewhere. And I think you maybe touched on that a wee bit, Amy, in what you were saying, that, of course some people want to leave and move around, and of course they do, but to stay should be just as much of a choice. To stay in their own area should be just as much of a choice as it is to leave. If the only choice is to leave, then we're not getting our communities right in some way. Okay, next slide, Charlotte. Sorry, I'm just pausing while I wait for the next slide to pop up. It's not come to me yet.
Your volume's sometimes a little bit glitchy, Linda, but it kind of comes and goes. So I'll just let you know if you've dropped off, okay?
Charlotte, I dropped out the call. I think I'm back.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, I suddenly find myself talking to nobody. But I do see the next slide, so that's good. This is principles, and again, it's just, I think, quite important before we get on to and into the more detail about the creative process and the learner-led consultation, just to have that kind of sense of the vision and the aspirations for the area, because that all feeds in. And if we can really enthuse and excite our teachers, our PSAs, our heads, the college, others in the area, we can excite them about what all this is going to do for the area, then that's how we'll really get that energy and enthusiasm to engage with it. So again, I don't need to read all of these, but you can probably see just by looking across that there are some principles there that are, I think, genuinely exciting. And I would say that people have got a real energy behind this. So I'll just leave you to have a quick look at those for a second rather than talk them through. Again, if anybody has got any questions or any thoughts or reflections, we will have another wee discussion later on, so feel free to pop them in or stick your hand up if you want to just shout out. We don't want this to be a talk at you all the time. Okay, next slide, Charlotte. I don't know if it's my internet, might be. I'm not seeing this at the next slide, so can someone else tell me if they are? That's it. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, Charlotte will talk a little bit about the evaluation of this work, but I've mentioned this already. So it's a learning strategy for Granton, and this started off in June 2020. So it did start during the pandemic, and so a lot of the work that we've done has obviously had to be not face-to-face, but we have managed to do some face-to-face. But it's very much about opening the door to a network of learning opportunities. And as I say, it's not just the institutions and buildings, but it's the community assets. So I often describe this as a strategy for the community and not for the school, but it ties very closely, and we've been really clear that it ties really closely in with our citywide strategy, which, as I mentioned earlier, is called Edinburgh Learns for Life. And Edinburgh Learns for Life is very much about ensuring that parents, carers, older people in the community, that the whole community really supports the young people, but supports their own learning. We know that things are changing. The world is shifting a little bit seismically at the moment, and has done over the last couple of years. There's been horrible things happened in people's lives, and things that are actually, we're already seeing, and again, I know that this will be reflected in your own context, that children are leaving school. They're actually, even we're seeing that even in early year settings, children are going away from school and they're going home because that's been their safe place for the last couple of years. We're seeing a high number of absences, and we're knowing that we're quite concerned about transitions from primary 7 into first year. We've got primary 1s coming into school who've had no early learning, and it's really tough. So we want to make sure that in this learning strategy that we we take cognizance of that. We take cognizance of the widening poverty-related attainment gap in some places, and that we do all that we can to address the mental health issues, the health issues, the educational issues that are faced by people by linking up with housing and everything else. So this is a learning strategy for the community. Can we have the next slide? Is anybody else seeing the next slide? Is it just me that's got this wonderful delay?
If you you've got your camera on at the moment. I don't know if it'll help.
Charlotte, I
if you
take it you can
switch
see
it
the
off.
next slide.
Yeah, I can see the next slide. I think there's a bit of a delay.
Okay, can anyone else see the next slide? Or is it just me? Okay, we've got it now. Right. Okay. So a culture and learning action plan. So those strategies that we were describing have a lot of things that they want to do and move forward with. So I'm not going to talk about them all. We're going to focus now in on the learner-led consultation. But before we do that, you can see that there's all sorts of projects that are taking place and have been taking place and are planned to just really make the community aware that something is happening, and to really think about how, I suppose, people see themselves as part of all of this, and how people think that this is for me, this is for us, and something is changing in our community, and something will be changing, and they actually start to feel positive about the future as well as the present, because there's been a lot of difficult stuff for people. So in terms of the learner-led consultation, schools have got to reform their curriculum. We wanted to make sure that all of the stuff I've been talking about in terms of the local community, in terms of the aspirations, in terms of the real needs, to make sure that, you know, learning is quality, is varied, meets the needs, that we have a parity of esteem. That's another thing that we're talking a lot about in Edinburgh Learns for Life, is parity of esteem, and making sure that the only message is not you've got to go to university, but actually a positive and sustained destination can be achieved by following your passion. And that's where we link back into a lot of the messages of Sir Ken Robinson, talking about creativity and finding your passion. So we've done a lot of work around this with our teachers right across the city, as well as in Granton, about saying, once a young person finds their passion, and it can be anything, they will start to be intrinsically invested, and you have to reform and build a curriculum that shows that young person those pathways and helps them follow their passion. And it may not be to a highly paid job, but if they're intrinsically invested and they're doing something that they love doing and making a living, that's good. And that is not about just forcing everybody down a certain route. Now, there's lots of work to be done with parents and carers around that as well, because parents are key influencers in children's lives. They're children's first educators before they ever go into early learning, and they're key influencers throughout life, based often on their own experiences and networks, which may be expansive and wonderful or limited and negative. So they are key influencers. If a young person finds their passion, they will follow that, given the opportunity, the things they need to learn to follow their passion. So we're talking a lot about that. We're talking a lot about parity of esteem, and that it does not mean you have to go to university, and it doesn't mean that your upbringing and the community in which you happen to be born dictates whether or not you go to university or do an apprenticeship or anything else. These things are parity of esteem pathways that should be young people's choice. So learner-led consultation was very much about trying to get young people thinking about their community, their learning, how they learn, why they learn, how they like to learn. And we have had over 200 participants in this consultation. We went to the schools and the early year settings and with the community centres, and we did it slightly differently with young people in communities as we did with the children and the young people in the schools. But I'll talk a wee bit about the schools. What we did with the schools was we spoke with the teachers, the head teachers, and we explained what it was we wanted to do, and put a lot of time and effort and energy into getting them to be, I suppose, receptive and ready to welcome an artist into their school for the specific reason of consulting with young people in a really creative way. The consultation was, I suppose the findings of that consultation were to help the head teachers and their senior leadership teams to think about curriculum reform in their school for their community. So while there were projects which had lots of spin-offs and lots of really interesting things and lots of unexpected outcomes, the whole process was very much about, let's hear what learners think and want, and you use that information. So the bit of work that we are now about to embark on is taking all those findings and helping the schools think about how that reforms curriculum. So it's a really fascinating bit of work. We worked quite carefully because, as all of you will know, if you're going to bring an artist or indeed any other partner into a school to work with your school for any period of time, the relationships have to be right from the start, and the partner has to understand as well what it is they're going in to do and not take folk off on a tangent, but at the same time take the children and the teachers on a journey that's highly creative and that uses really creative and unexpected ways of opening up discussion and getting people to think and look differently. So we had some absolutely amazing artists working in the schools. So Charlotte, can you go on to the next slide? And we'll just bear with the delay. Oh no delay this time. Fabulous. Okay, so 2 early year settings, between October and November. So that was Craig Royston Early Year Centre and Granton Early Year Centre, and artists went in and did some absolutely lovely work. We worked with 3 primary schools, and those are 3 primary schools in the area, all with a slightly different demographic, and it was interesting, you know, the different approaches that the artists took, and there were some really key themes coming through, and I'll talk about them just in a minute or two. And then in the young people, so a range of different artists. We had 3 artists working in the same early year settings in primary schools, but a range of different artists going about it in quite a different way, working in the high school with our youth project, with Spartans Academy, which is an alternative academy curriculum, and then also working with partners in the community with adults. So we've aggregated all of that, and our lifelong learning colleagues are taking a lot of the feedback from the adults and the young people and taking that forward in terms of some of the community learning and lifelong learning we're taking forward with our quality improvement colleagues, the primary and early years findings. Next slide. Here's our lovely artists. Heather, I'll talk a little bit briefly about Heather. Heather, we have worked with Heather on many projects, so we know her very well, and some of you on this call may know Heather, I don't know, but she taught for many years, she taught art in St Crispin Special School, and that's a school for children with autism and quite complex needs. So Heather's approach, she's now a freelance artist, but she does a lot of work in education. But Heather's approach is one that I really value, which is that every learner, no matter who you are, is entitled to high quality and is able to produce high quality work. And the work that Heather and her students, when she was working in St Crispin's, the work that they produced was phenomenal. But because she had to be highly creative herself in being able to communicate and help the pupils and the young people that she was working with in St Crispin's communicate when a lot of them didn't have communication skills, they had to do it in different ways. So she brings all of that, and that's been absolutely wonderful. So she was one of our selected artists. We put a call out and we got applications and we interviewed and picked our 3 artists. Marion has a lovely, eclectic, all sorts of different backgrounds, and she's worked a lot with different languages. She works a lot with French, so she was really able to engage a lot of our non-English speakers, not through French, but through her knowledge and understanding of working again in really creative ways and helping people who didn't necessarily have a voice, either because they felt unable to contribute or because they didn't have the language, to look at that through art and creativity. And Trish, She's an artist, has also worked many years in education, but she's also grown up in the community and her family are in the community. So again, the three artists brought really different perspectives, but they all brought the same thing as well. And the same thing was an absolute creative approach and an absolute commitment to caring about the learners that they were working with. So they also collaborated and shared and talked about how they were going about things and the sorts of projects they were doing. But each one went out into the community, had creative projects and created some sort of a legacy artwork. It wasn't necessarily a huge legacy artwork, but what we wanted, the brief for them was that the legacy artwork that they created, the children had to own, and the children had to see themselves and their thoughts and their ideas in it, so that if they were inviting parents, carers or the community into the school, they could point to the legacy and they could say, those were my ideas, this is what we thought about learning, this is how we're going to take our learning forward in our school. Can we have the next slide, Charlotte? Okay, so once again, I'm waiting. Here we go. So those are the artists that worked, and I can't talk so much about those artists because I was a lot less involved. In fact, I was really not very involved at all in the young people in the community and adult. But these are artists that worked with the young people, with partners and in the community. So what I do know is that a lot of the same messages were coming through. And what I also know is that the artists were seen as highly engaging, highly creative, and people who were even a little bit sceptical. And it's the same with the schools. They were a little bit sceptical, a little bit unsure, saying, well, what will we do? How will we know? And we were saying, look, kind of be creatively brave, go on a journey. And that was exactly the same as what they did with the community and adults. So again, those are three artists who I'm sure we will work with again. Next slide, Charlotte. Okay, there we go. Okay, a very quick overview. So we aimed to engage, and I think this is probably just repeating things I've already said in different words, but we aimed to engage in really meaningful consultation with young people about the curriculum in their school and the services in the community that impact on them. Engage staff, children, young people in co-producing the creative process and developing skills. And the co-production bit, I think, is a word that's often used, but not necessarily often done well, or not always done well, would be fair to say. So we wanted to really ensure this was a genuine co-production. And I've talked a wee bit before about the legacy artwork. So this was to impact school improvement planning and the learning strategy across Edinburgh, and to provide baseline data and tools for school leaders and young people so that they could evaluate their curriculum as it goes through that redesign and reform process. So the bit that we will be really kind of on over the next wee while is that the school doesn't forget as they're planning their curriculum and as they go into improvement planning over the next little while after, that they don't forget all of this data and all of this information, and that they actually can go back to their children and their young people and say, you said we are doing, remember you said, here's how it is. So we want to actually have the young people feel that they've got the opportunity, I suppose, to hold our leaders to account, because why would we consult with them if we weren't able to do that? Next slide, Charlotte.
Just before we move on, do you want me to just I'll come in here and just talk about the evaluative process and what we did, because that was the element that I was involved with. So the way that we captured the results from this consultation were as key findings, and then we gave subsequent recommendations for schools, for SLT, for practitioners who participated in this project. And I think it's important to emphasise that the methodology that was used in this consultation, it was really different to standard survey methods. It felt different, and the methods that we used, they were different. It was new, it was novel. And by taking this creative approach and working with an artist, feedback, it was not gathered via survey questionnaires. It was very different. We looked at feedback and it was elicited over a period of time by using open-ended questions, conversations while making and doing things. It was much more informal, and exploring the community and being willing to follow the children's lines of thought, very much learner-led, and it was also from direct observation. So the learners' ideas and thoughts were captured also via artist diaries, quotes, pictures, films, and from debrief sessions with the teachers, artists and all the staff who were involved with the evaluations, so myself and some of the other development officers in the Edinburgh Learns for Life team. So this approach, it enabled observations and information to be captured that it wouldn't have necessarily been identified from a standard consultation approach, and the feedback from each school and setting, it showed clear themes that were broadly consistent across each of the projects. I was involved with the primary settings, but we were able to look at the early year settings and some of the other settings as well that were involved too with other young people. And taking this creative approach resulted in unexpected outcomes as well as important insights that I think are normally too subtle to notice when you're doing a focus group or a questionnaire that's really quite structured. That being said, we did identify that it was important to note that for this type of creative approach to be effective, we did need to have some clear questions that were explored but had a lot of room for expansion and kind of looking at the creative answers that the young people were giving us. So these were: why is learning important to you? What you would like to learn about and what is important to you? Where could learning take place and how do you learn best? So I'll just move on to the next slide. Linda, hopefully you'll see that within the next few seconds. Can you see that,
Clearly,
Linda?
I'm not seeing it. Not yet.
We've just got a timeline here. So whilst it's loading for yourself, Linda, I can just talk about some of the key findings and themes that came up. And what we can do is we can share with you the kind of overview of all the findings that kind of looks in more detail about these. We're very happy to share them with you as kind of some follow-up reading. And we've also got a short video too that kind of captures that. So we did, as I mentioned, we identified a number of different themes throughout all the different settings, and I'll just take a time to go through a couple of these with you now. So there was a clear desire for the young people for ownership over learning spaces, both indoor and outdoor. And the outdoor spaces were really important to the young people. They told us that they wanted safe places to play in their school and in their communities, and the importance of places being welcoming and stimulating, and they really wanted to feel that sense of ownership over the spaces that they learnt in by helping with design, improving these spaces. Pupil voice was a huge key theme which came through. Excuse me. And they were the young people, the primary learners in particular that I was kind of working with, there was a strong sense of how important it was for their voices to be heard and to have influence over how and what they learn in school. They wanted to be part of that decision-making process. I think as well from the back of that, the learners were really, really happy and enjoyed being involved in their planning and leadership of learning. And in each setting, we saw examples of young people leading on their learning. Excuse me, just going to have a sip of tea. There wasn't always a set outcome in the creative process. And I think at first the teachers and practitioners they found this challenging. They said it was challenging to kind of let go of the learning process, but we found with the right sort of listening and questioning, the young people were actually able to come up with the ideas, make designs and offer solutions to problems posed. It's all about that creative process and developing those skills. And in the majority of sessions, young people were able to work in teams. It was all about that resilience and the impacts it's had on well-being. The projects, they took place during COP26. So it was really interesting going in and listening to some of the discussions that were taking place when I was having conversations with the young people and the teachers involved too. So sustainability and climate change were hugely prominent. And the young people, again, they said how important sustainability was and looking after our planet was to them. And the children are the future. They're the ones who they need to come up with the ideas, and we can support them with that to look after our planet for the future. So young people, they were really passionate about campaigning for more plants, for growing spaces and recycling facilities in their school settings. And it gave young people ideas about how they could transfer these ideas into other areas of their lives as well. Citizenship and activism in the local community were also other themes that came up, and the young people told us how much they cared about others and their community. The knowledge of local assets going back to some of the discussion points we had earlier, the young people were really passionate about that. They were saying that they didn't know and had a strong awareness of some of the things that were in their assets. And only when we went out with the young people to kind of see what was in their community, they were aware of what they saw as deficits and things that they could not access, which also linked into the equity as well of the young people being aware of things that they had and things that they didn't have that perhaps other people in to. The learners absolutely loved being part of the creative process, and it was hugely apparent that making time for creativity and creative skills progression, it's so important. And across all the settings that we saw young people, if they're given the time to explore, discover and be challenged to look at things in different ways and make those connections with their own lives and express their thoughts, they will thrive. The staff and learners as well loved working with the creative practitioners. It was really wonderful to see that. And developing creative skills in the classroom, it's not necessarily relying on bringing in an artist or a creative practitioner. However, all the settings fed back that actually working with a creative professional, their own professional learning really developed greatly. And I think just linking back to my points on well-being, all the practitioners involved, and even from myself going in, the artists who worked with them for, it was over 6 sessions they were kind of in the schools for, that they really noticed the positive impacts it had on well-being, was perseverance and resilience, which is a huge part in learner well-being. So those are just some of the kind of key findings. Linda, I don't know if you want to add anything to this slide on the kind of timeline, or if you want me to move on.
Charlotte, I'm going to ask you to move on, and I'm afraid I've just been called into another meeting that I am actually going to have to go to, and I really do apologise, but can I ask you, because I think the rest of it is going to be kind of yours anyway, so if you're happy to just lead on now, I do need to go. I'm really, really sorry.
No problem, we'll see you later.
This is what comes with the new role, so I need to go, but if you can lead on, and lovely to see you all, and sorry to have to depart so abruptly, but thanks, Charlotte.
No worries.
Over to you. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
What I'll maybe do is, because we've just got discussion slides here, and then a short video which I'll just send out I'll post in the chat, and people can watch in their own time, and then we'll wrap it up. So what I'll do is I'll just minimize my screen. So I'm just wondering the best way to do this, unless perhaps Barbara or Amy want to kind of chip in with if people are have got answers or discussion around how can a creative approach inform curriculum reform, what impacts this can have. I think what I'll do is, because I quite like to see people's faces, I'll stop screen sharing and I'll put the questions in the chat. I think that's maybe the best way to do that. So just, sorry, 1 second, just trying to multitask. Sorry, they've gone very, very large, but we've got here, how can a creative approach inform curriculum reform, and what impacts can a creative curriculum have on a whole school community? So feel free to stick up your hand, or you can post your comments or your thoughts in the chat. But hopefully, from kind of speaking about some of the key themes that kind of came out from it, and also from the discussions earlier, or perhaps you have some suggestions or comments or thoughts on things that you've seen in your own practice. Barbara?
Sorry, I'm just me again, but I think sometimes if somebody starts, then other people jump in, and hopefully that will work. Yeah, for me, a creative approach does 2 things. First of all, the approach itself, which is not about giving out questionnaires and the usual kind of focus group meetings and all the rest, which can be a bit dry and don't really appeal to many people. So using a creative approach will draw people in. I think it'll attract people to attend. So right away, you're getting more numbers, you're getting a broader spectrum of people, representative of large, more groups in the community. And the second thing is, I think that a creative approach, because of that, will in fact give you a better feel for how people across community are feeling, and not just those who are actually in the school, which is kind of where it usually sits. So it won't be just the learners, the parents and the staff, but actually you're drawing in representation from across the community. So always good, I think, to use a creative approach.
Absolutely. And I think even when we were working with some of the other team members who kind of weren't familiar with looking at these creative approaches, it felt like we were kind of all learning together, which was really nice. But certainly when we started kind of working with the schools, the practitioners were a bit not wary, but perhaps a bit uncertain about what it was going to look like. I suppose that's like with anything being creatively brave, isn't it? But and as you said as well, with working with partners and building those relationships, those sustainable relationships is just key. Amy, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, I think what it does personally for me is it allows that ownership, because there's this creative approach, which to me is a collaborative approach as well, but also it's accessible because, again, for me, using creativity means that you're allowing people to come in at the level that they're at, because for me, that's what creativity does. So it's kind of promoting that ethos that, you know what, we want you involved, you are valued, and we will take these actions as well. You know, if it's, again, this is kind of personal opinion, if it's not creative, it almost feels tokenistic to me. And then people don't see the purpose behind it, and they don't invest in it. And then, and then what's the impact? So I think having a creative approach allows for all those voices, those participations to be involved in a capacity that they feel they can be as well. So that obviously is going to have a really great impact on the whole school community, you know, parents' engagement, your local businesses, artists, practitioners, and all those are going to be involved and feel the purpose behind it. And the approach to the curriculum as well, again, having learners at the centre of that will empower them, but also staff feeling like they also are included in it. So that's my tuppence worth.
Oh, definitely, and I agree with everything you're saying there. I think as well, what you mentioned about the tokenistic nature, that was something we didn't want for it to be tokenistic. I think, as you were saying earlier, Barbara, as well, about how we really wanted the creativity, that the language being used around that to be explicitly mentioned and spoken about, because we want it to be sustainable. We want this is a long-term strategy that we're really trying to embed here. So it was great to see the outcomes and the impacts that it had. Lisa, I don't know, your hand popped up and then went down again, so I'm not sure if maybe you wanted to put something in the chat instead, but feel free to keep any other thoughts coming through. But I think the main kind of impacts that we had on the project, and it's obviously, it's a new approach to something, so of course we got loads of next steps that we could look at, but the main impacts that we had, I mean, on well-being, it was phenomenal. The confidence building through increased opportunities to share those ideas and solutions to problems for the learners and for practitioners, SLT, designing curriculum rationale, class communities building by working collectively on a project that was learner-led. It felt very novel, and the learners loved being asked and being listened to. I think that was one of the quotes we've got in the video is the learners saying, we're actually listened to. It's not just, it's taken on, it's listened to, it's not done. Things are actually done about it, which was fantastic. I think learning about what a consultation means and understanding that the learners can have a direct impact on change. Lots of learners, what is a consultation? That was kind of the first questions that they were having, but by the end they fully understood what their role was and what their role was, their part to play in it. The increased opportunities to explore their curiosity and learning curiously, embedding those creativity skills and the progression of that, and exploring and verbalizing and using new vocabulary, and developing social skills and working effectively in teams. That's a huge part of doing this, and the work that the artists did, they managed it extremely well, being in the classroom environment. And I think in the last few years, schools have been under immense pressures and the needs of learners have just grown exponentially. So it was wonderful to see the young people working so well together. and learning about the artists and what they do. The young people, just as much as the practitioners, loved working with the artists, and it was about kind of building those relationships, and the staff development in aspects of creativity and learning about creativity skills development. We delivered professional learning to support them with that, and it was wonderful to hear of the impacts that actually using the explicit language and progression frameworks with the learners had. So if anyone else has any questions or anything, you're very welcome to put your hand up or stick anything in the chat. But I have a short clip that I can share with you in the chat, and I can share the kind of the project overview with you that you can look at in your spare time. But please feel free to get in touch with myself or Linda if you've got any questions, or you're interested in maybe doing a similar approach in your setting, or would like to talk about it further. We'd be more than happy to. But I know we're slightly earlier than we thought, but I think we'll wrap it up there. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Barbara, Amy, and Jonathan, for letting us have this input at the event this week. I've absolutely loved going to some of the sessions. I've signed up to a few more for the rest of the week, and will be at the conversation with the NCLN tomorrow representing SEIC. There's a little form in the chat there that Amy's just posted in. So we would really value any evaluative feedback. It really helps us to plan for future sessions. Hopefully by next year, we'll maybe be looking at doing something face-to-face. I'm not sure, but it would be really appreciative if you could do that. So thank you so much, everyone, and hope you enjoy the rest of the week of the events, and take care. We'll see you soon.